What is up, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to another episode of Double Move Sports. As always, I'm Stef, and I'm here with my best friend Alex. Say what's up to the people.
Hey everyone, we got some hot takes for you today. We're really excited to jump into it. We've just been going back and forth for a while now, me and Steph, before we recorded here, about some of these takes on quarterbacks for different teams that are in need of a quarterback. So we've got some great stats for you today. We've got some great pieces of information. And as always, Double Move Sports hot takes. We're super excited to get into it today.
That's right, and what we've done is essentially looked at the entire league, all 32 teams, and broken it down into tiers. And what we've essentially come to the summary of is that there's 7 teams in the NFL right now that either are going to be drafting a quarterback here coming up in April, or there's no current clear starter at the moment. So there's 7 of these teams, and we'll go ahead and just hop into it here. The Miami Dolphins, they have the second most cap space in the NFL at $83.8 million available. They have the 5th overall pick in this draft. Everyone has Tua Tagovailoa going to the Dolphins. Also think it could be a great fit for them. They do have draft picks at the 18th and the 26th spot. And Ryan Fitzpatrick is still there. So, are we just going to go ahead and say, hey, this is a chalk pick. Tua is going to end up in Miami?
It seems so likely that, that Tua ends up in Miami at number 5 and that Fitzpatrick is the starter going into the year. Fitzpatrick has said he wants to be back. The Dolphins have expressed interest in bringing him back. That seems like it's going to happen. Drafting Tua makes too much sense. Maybe they draft another running back with their first-round draft capital to go along with him. We know they've got Devontae Parker and Preston Williams and Mike Gesicki, some young weapons at receiver and tight end. So I think it makes sense to bring Fitzpatrick in, continue to bridge that gap as they rebuild, bring in Tua, have him learn, have him get some experience. Maybe he takes over halfway through the season, but to me, this one's pretty clear-cut. I can't necessarily see them going another direction unless a team jumps up before the Dolphins pick at 5 and snags Tua. We've seen the Panthers go after this number 1 pick from the Bengals, who we all think they're going to draft Joe Burrow. We've seen that the Panthers want to get it. I don't know that they do. Maybe they trade up to 2 or 3 and snag Tua away from the Dolphins. So barring something like that, I think it's chalk. Maybe the Dolphins actually move up if they're not so sure they can get him at 5. But in just about every mock draft I've seen, and then even looking at the board myself, it makes too much sense how the current draft order is now for that to happen. So I'm with you there.
Yeah, it could be a future dynasty being built in Miami. They also have 2 picks in the second round, 2 picks in the third round. And you mentioned Fitzpatrick there. He's on just a $5.5 million a year deal. He's on a contract year in 2020. So could be a guy where they, ease Tua in maybe a first half of the season or maybe the whole year coming off that hip injury. He has been cleared, so should be fine. But looks like Tua's going to the Dolphins here. I think that's a one that has our stamp of approval. So let's move over to the Bengals, one we just mentioned. They have the 15th most cap space in the NFL at $46.6 million, and they have the number 1 overall pick. Everyone and their mother says that Joe Burrow is going to be a Bengal. I did see a little bit of debate on Twitter recently, some saying that Tua would actually be a better selection here at the 101. The Bengals also have a 2nd and 3rd round pick, but are we locking in Burrow here?
Yeah, we are. I can't imagine them going in any other direction. They got that 101. I don't think they're going to trade it away. Burrow feels like one of those guys that doesn't come around every year. It's not very often that the number 1 overall pick feels like such a sure thing. I remember Andrew Luck's year, it felt like that. But since then, I think Burrow is the most sure thing at the number 1 overall pick that we've seen. So I think the Bengals go Burrow. It would be silly for them to go any other way. And having said that, it looks like Andy Dalton's going to be done in Cincinnati. So as kind of a trickle-down effect, it's going to be really interesting to see where Dalton ends up. But Burrow is the guy for them. If they can shore up that O-line a little bit, they've got Boyd and John Ross. There's a lot of hype around Joe Mixon. That's another team where their offense with a young head coach could be really dangerous here in the next few years.
Yeah, and seeing what they do on the defensive side with that $46 million in cap space, if they don't spend it on O-line, or if they do spend it on O-line, I should say, and don't spend any on defense, this could be another one where we're circling every player in fantasy on the offensive side of the ball for the Bengals. But let's move over to Jacksonville here. The Jaguars have their 30th So very low amount of cap space. They're actually $5 million over the cap right now. They do have the 9th overall pick in the upcoming draft. I'm seeing maybe Justin Herbert will fall to them. They also have the 20th overall pick. And then there's the Nick Foles and Gardner Minshew situation as well. Foles is on a huge contract. He's like the 15th highest paid player in football right now, making $22 million a year. Gardner Minshew's there making less than $1 million a year. So you know, how do you see this going, Alex, with the Jags backfield?
It's tough because on one side of the coin you think, oh, we just paid Nick Foles all this money, he's got to be the starter. And then on the other side you're like, oh, Gardner Minshew had so much hype and so much fun and he's such a fan favorite, he's got to be the starter and he's the younger guy. We're not competing for a Super Bowl this year. So it's tough. They're in a really tough situation. I think, you know, hindsight's 2020, but they really mismanaged that situation. They went after Foles in kind of like a win now move to acquire him and give him that much money. And now that, you know, the wheels kind of fell off and he got hurt, they traded Jalen Ramsey. It doesn't really look like they're in a team that's in a situation to contend for a Super Bowl right now, like it looked like they might be 2 years ago. So they're really in a tough spot with no cap space. You know, an undrafted rookie this year and Gardner Minshew playing so well, giving them such a debate at quarterback. Interestingly enough, Nick Foles, you said he's getting paid $22 million this year. If they cut him, the cap hit is actually over $30 million. So I don't think anyone's trading for that money unless they package picks to take Nick Foles off their hands. So I think, you know, it's tough. They're kind of stuck with him. I don't think they're going to draft another guy because that just crowds that quarterback room even more. I think they probably move on with Gardner Minshew as their guy, see what they've got, and then, you know, play out that Foles contract, kind of take the hit and go from there. But, you know, at this point, I think it's got to be Gardner Minshew. He's a promising young prospect. He's got some good weapons. Maybe they draft a receiver. It's a really deep class. I know they've got, you know, Chark there who looks like the clear-cut number one. Dede and Conley are pretty good, but maybe they want another really dominant weapon there in Jacksonville to go along with Leonard Fournette at running back. So I think it could make sense to maybe give Minshew another fun young weapon, shore up that offensive line and see what you got.
Yeah, with this super deep wide receiver draft class coming in, maybe they grab Judy or CeeDee Lamb with that 9th overall pick. They also have a 2nd and 3rd round pick, so maybe they take a late flyer on a potential quarterback that could play out. But I'm with you on the Minshew Mania hype train. I hope he sticks around and takes a step up. Yeah, we know everybody's cheering for him. But let's move over to the Panthers here. The Carolina Panthers, the new look Carolina Panthers, I should say, with Matt Rule now a head coach from Baylor. They're 21st in the NFL in cap space with $31.7 million. And they have a couple different QB options in that room. They have Cam Newton, who's turning 30. He's there on $20 million a year. Kyle Allen is still there. And maybe Matt Rule comes in and says, look, I want to get my guy. And they have that 7th overall pick. They also have a 2nd and a 3rd. So, Alex, what's your take on the Panthers situation? Kind of feel like they're going to keep rolling with Cam here and hope for the best.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that because I remember Cliff Kingsbury this past season, a little bit different situation where they had drafted Rosen in the top 10 and then Kingsbury comes in and says, no, I want to get my guy. And he kind of unwinds everything to go get Kyler. You know, Cam is a lot more established as an NFL quarterback. He's won games. He's been a leader. So I think it's a little bit more unlikely that they do that, but it's very possible that Rule comes in, like you said, and just says, hey, I'm taking over. This is, you know, a new era of Panther football. We got Christian McCaffrey, who's the best running back in the league, 2 really young, dynamic receivers. I want to kind of unwind a little bit and get my young franchise guy and go from there and let these guys grow together. I think the most likely scenario is that Cam Newton is their starter this season, but here's a hot take. A situation that could be fun is interdivisional Jameis Winston going to Carolina. You know, I don't necessarily think that the Bucs are going to sign him to an extension. Maybe they franchise tag him. But when you think about the Panthers and what they're looking at here, like you got DJ Moore, you got Curtis Samuel, you got Christian McCaffrey, these playmakers on that team. You know, Jameis Winston loves to throw the ball. If he can take that interception number down from 30 to like 20 interceptions is a ton, and that would be a 10 interception improvement, which is unbelievable to think about. Maybe he doesn't have as much pressure on his shoulders and doesn't have to throw it quite as much with Christian McCaffrey in the backfield. Maybe being able to check it down to him is going to help him out a lot, but I think that could be a hot take that's a little bit fun if we want them to switch it up a little bit and if they don't draft a quarterback. But All in all, I do think the most likely scenario is Cam Newton is in Carolina this season as the starter.
And I was talking to a big Panthers fan, Seth Glass. Shout out to you, Seth, on Twitter. I was asking him his thoughts on what he thinks they do, Carolina does moving forward. He says he's in the minority. He thinks that they keep Cam Newton and try to draft folks on defense. They've got weapons on offense, which is true. You mentioned McCaffrey. DJ Moore's breaking out. Curtis Samuel has shown promise at times. And then their tight end situations, whether it's Greg Olsen, I think they've already moved on from him, or Ian Thomas. He's an up-and-comer that I think we should have our eyes on here. But they certainly do have weapons. And what Seth was saying is Cam is good enough when healthy to get them to the playoffs. I don't know if I necessarily agree with that 100%. I think that might be a little bit of a hot take, but whether Cam comes back or not, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out. Let's go ahead and move over to the Buccaneers. You just mentioned Jameis Winston. The Bucs have the most cap space in the NFL at $85 million. They could draft a quarterback with that 14th overall pick in this draft. I'm of the mindset that they franchise tag Jameis Winston, let him see if he can bring those turnover numbers down a bit and really prove himself. He only had 1 year in a new system with Bruce Arians. I think, he could take a step, continues to learn, but also seeing some love for Jacob Eason, the prospect out of Washington who has crazy arm strength. A lot of folks saying he'd be a great fit for the Arians offense, and we know that the Buccaneers have weapons. They're a team that could be sneaky, maybe a dark horse for playoffs this year, but what are your thoughts on the Bucs?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. They're a good football team. We saw them win, I think, 7 games this year, which they did not feel like a 7-win team. But they were, and that's with 30 turnover or 30 interception Jameis Winston. You look at the weapons they've got, with Chris Godwin, Mike Evans, O.J. Howard. Ronald Jones came on there at the end of the season, and there's rumors about David Johnson getting cut. We know what he did with Bruce Arians in Arizona. You bring in David Johnson to pair with Ronald Jones, that's a great backfield. So they've got weapons. What kind of quarterback would not want to play with that kind of offense? Bruce Arians is going to let the quarterback throw the ball, and I think you're right. I think the most likely scenario here is that Jameis Winston does get the franchise tag. I think they give him one more season with Bruce Arians to say, like, hey, can you do what you did last year, but maybe cut the interceptions in half? Because if that was the case, they might have snuck into a wild card spot. So, but if we do see Jameis Winston move on, like we just talked about the potential of him going to the Panthers or maybe it's somewhere else, 2 names, more hot takes that I want to keep an eye on for Tampa Bay are Phillip Rivers and Tom Brady. Tom Brady is an extremely hot take. I don't know that he leaves New England. If he does, I don't know if he goes to Tampa, but if you look at him and you look at Phillip Rivers, they're guys who have won games, they've been leaders, they're veterans, they've seen it all. And especially with Brady, you saw him really get frustrated with the weapons in New England this year. And if Brady wants guys who are going to make plays for him and he wants a dynamic offense, I don't think there's a better spot for it right now than Tampa Bay with Chris Godwin and Mike Evans. And then on the Phillip Rivers side, he's not going to be back with the Chargers next season. We've seen him be very, very good in the past, as recent as 2 years ago. So if they bring in a guy like Phillip Rivers who can still sling the ball, we've seen him have incredible pass volume throughout his career. And, maybe he takes care of the ball a little bit better than he did this past season. That's an upgrade from Jameis Winston at this point in his career, in my opinion. So I think Tom Brady and Phillip Rivers are guys that could be prime prospects for Tampa Bay if they want to move on from Jameis and they think they have a shot to win now. If they can shore up that pass defense with the great run defense they had last year and they can bring in a quarterback who's going to, take care of the ball a little bit better and still be effective, this is a team that can contend, and I really do believe that.
Yeah, their defense, especially their run defense, was dominant, one of the best run defenses in the league. If they can shore up that secondary a bit, they might be a team that does enter into win-now mode, and we know with all of that cap space, they could pay a guy like Brady. If Brady wants to, hey, he's just doing it for the money. Now, I don't think that is the case, and I don't think Giselle is going to let Tommy go down to Tampa Bay, such a small market. I think they're like the second smallest fan base, only ahead of the LA Chargers. So, no, there's a lot of different ways that the cookie could crumble for the Buccaneers. Some other names in free agency that they could get would be like Teddy Bridgewater, Dak Prescott. I don't think he's going to be available, but it's one I'll throw out there. Drew Brees is a free agent. There's no way he's going to the Buccaneers. And then another one I think would be interesting is Ryan Tannehill. They could bring him in, and he had a fantastic season. There's no guarantee that the Titans are either going to be able to afford him or even want him there. And then speaking of the Titans, there's also Marcus Mariota. The Winston Mariota rivalry continues to live on. So maybe we see that continue down in Tampa Bay.
Yeah, imagine them bringing in Mariota. Imagine them bringing in Mariota and keeping Jameis Winston. Maybe they tag Winston, sign Mariota to a smaller deal, and have those former number 1, number 2 picks battle it out for the starting job. Would that be something? I think we'd have a 30 for 30 on that here in the next couple of years.
Absolutely. You love that rivalry. Let's move on to your Indianapolis Colts. They have the third most cap space in the league at $81 million. They have the 13th overall pick. My guess is they're going to grab a wide receiver. We talked about how great this wide receiver class is, and that is a need for them. So I think they go receiver with that first-round pick. They also have 2 second-round picks and a third. As a Colts fan, how are you feeling about Jacoby Brissett right now? Do you think they need to bring somebody in, maybe a Teddy Bridgewater? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think Brissett is a good quarterback. I do. I think he's a good quarterback, and I think he was put in a very, very difficult situation this past season where, he's thrown into the starting job 2 weeks before the regular season, thinks Andrew Luck's going to be there, and boom, he's the guy. And then you look at his weapons, and Devin Funchess went out early with an injury. T.Y. Hilton missed, it felt like, most of the season. Brissett got banged up himself and missed a couple games. And then, Eric Ebron went on IR later on, so he didn't have a ton to work with. His weapons were hurt. He was, rushed into the role that he didn't think he was going to have. So give him a full offseason. I think he could take a step up, but at the same time, I just don't think he's the kind of guy that can lead the Colts to a Super Bowl victory. The Colts have a very good team around him. They've got a great O-line, a really solid defense. If they can bring in another receiver with that number 13 pick, I'm thinking like a Jerry Jeudy type guy. It is a deep class. Chris Ballard loves to trade back, so maybe they trade back, get some more picks, and take a receiver at the end of the first round. I think they've got the team to make a run. I love Jacoby, but as a Colts fan, I don't think he's the guy. I just can't picture him lifting up the Lombardi Trophy at the end of the season. So for me, 2 names that are really interesting, you brought up one is Teddy Bridgewater. I know we talked about Rivers with the Buccaneers, but I think Phillip Rivers would actually be a really good fit on this Colts team. They've got a great O-line. After Rivers got beat up in LA this past season, I think he would love to have some time in the pocket. Both of these guys, Bridgewater and Rivers, are guys that at this stage of their career, they don't have to go out and throw the ball 40 times a game, but they can manage a game, have a good running game. They're both good play-action passers, and they can be very effective. And I think they can do enough to lead the Colts to enough regular season wins to get to the playoffs, maybe win that division. And they're both guys that I think if they have to turn it on in the playoffs, we talk about these like Patrick Mahomes level guys winning Super Bowls, but if you think about Nick Foles, you think about Joe Flacco, those are 2 guys that when they won Super Bowls, they weren't these gunslingers during the regular season. They were more of game managers with good teams around them. But when it came time to do it in the playoffs, they were able to put their foot on the gas and win a championship. And I think that's what Bridgewater and Rivers would be able to do. So I think those are 2 good names to bring in and compete with Jacoby. Still give Jacoby the chance to be the starter this year, have a good training camp battle. But I think it might be time for the Colts to take this great team they have and try to win a Super Bowl and do everything they can to get there. And also, Andrew Luck, if you're listening, we'd love to have you back. I've actually seen some rumors. Maybe people are just messing with Colts Nation, that the Colts have reached out to Luck about a return. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but if Luck's not going to be there, I think one of these other guys would be great.
Absolutely. Maybe we see the reinvention of Phillip Rivers. But I will say, Jacoby Brissett hasn't had a full offseason to prepare. Maybe we see him take a step up as well. Everybody who comes out of that locker room says that Brissett is an extremely hard worker. Everyone on the team loves him. It's also as a contract year for him. So he has something to prove as well if he wants to get paid after this season. But let's talk about the last team here. The Los Angeles Chargers, they're 12th in the NFL in cap space with $52 million. There's a couple different quarterback options. They have the 6th overall pick. I'm seeing a lot of mocks say that they're going to pick up Justin Herbert out of Oregon. Maybe Tua falls to them. They have Tyrod Taylor currently there as their backup. And then, we mentioned Phillip Rivers a couple times already. He's gone. I don't see him re-signing with the Chargers under any circumstance. And then the Chargers also have a 2nd and a 3rd round draft pick as well. I'm kind of thinking they take Justin Herbert here and kind of let Tyrod Taylor ease them in, kind of like a Browns did with Tyrod for Baker. Maybe we see that for Herbert. What are your thoughts on the Chargers center situation?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think Justin Herbert is the guy they're locked in on. And like we said about the draft, it's really hard to predict right now. Burrow feels like a lock at 101, but you look past that and, it seems like the Dolphins at 5 and the Chargers at 6 are the other two that'll take a quarterback. But we've talked about teams like the Panthers. We've talked about teams like the Jaguars. These are teams that could use a guy, and Tua and Herbert are guys that a lot of teams think can be a franchise quarterback. So I would not be surprised one bit to see one of those teams jump up in front of the Dolphins and Chargers to pick one of those players. So that could derail every plan they have. That's also after free agency. So maybe after free agency happens, we'll have a little bit more context on what's going to happen in the draft. But I do think a rookie is most likely for the Chargers. They've got some veteran weapons around, like Keenan Allen. I mean, Hunter Henry's a free agent, but I think they'll bring him back. You got Mike Williams, a big target to stretch the field. Melvin Gordon could walk, but I think Eckler will be back as a restricted free agent. So you kind of see this process these days of young quarterbacks being able to take really big strides in year 2. We saw Mahomes in year 2 win MVP, in year 3 win a Super Bowl. We saw Lamar Jackson win MVP in year 2. So I think it's very reasonable that the Chargers draft a quarterback this year with the hopes that in year 2 or 3 he can take those weapons on that team. And they've got a pretty good defense too with Bosa and Derwin James when they're healthy. But absolutely. I think they can draft a guy, hope that early in his career he can win games, and try to use those veteran pieces that they have while they're still young enough and in their prime to win a championship. So I think the most likely situation is to draft a quarterback at 6, and then take Tyrod Taylor and that rookie quarterback into camp and have him battle it out for the starting job. I think maybe Tyrod Taylor ends up being the starter week 1, but I do think a rookie quarterback finishes the season as a starter for the LA Chargers.
Yeah, we're only a few years removed from Tyrod Taylor taking the Bills all on his own to the playoffs a couple years in a row. I think he still has a little bit left in the tank if they want to leave it up to him this year and let their rookie kind of ease in. But who knows? Maybe they make a free agent move, 12th overall, $50 million in cap space does leave him some room to go out and get a free agent if they choose to do so. But Alex, any other teams that you want to bring up here? Any names you want to throw out? Maybe some dark horses or some guys in free agency that are a little bit lesser talked about?
One guy that comes to mind is it's Josh Rosen, who was on the Dolphins this past season. I don't necessarily believe in Josh Rosen's talent, but I will say to start his career, he got put in 2 of the worst situations you can possibly be put in. He was thrown in too quickly with the Cardinals, didn't have a lot of good pieces around him, really struggled. And then Cliff Kingsbury comes in and ships him off to Miami to a team that's tanking and selling off all their assets, all their O-linemen, their weapons, their running backs, everything. So it's like, he plays poorly as you would expect, and then Fitzpatrick takes over as the starter. So this is a guy who was a top 10 draft pick 2 years ago, and he's already left for dead. So, I wouldn't mind seeing him end up on another team as a backup. I know on Hard Knocks this year we saw Nathan Peterman with the Raiders, and, he didn't play any games this year, and he wasn't like a game changer, but it was really nice to see a guy like that go and have a little bit of a redemption story after what we saw from him early in his career. So I think Rosen's a guy that could maybe go somewhere as a backup. And when you think about guys that started games this year, you got like Jeff Driscoll and David Blau and Will Grier and Chase Daniel. And, maybe a guy like Rosen goes in and is a backup and gets thrown into a starting lineup if a quarterback gets hurt and has some solid games. So I think he's a guy to keep an eye on just as like a younger prospect. Why not take a shot at Josh Rosen as a backup? Maybe he's still got some of that potential locked away. Maybe Bill Belichick will take him and turn him into the next Tom Brady. Who knows? But yeah, other than that, the other thing that's like, it just popped in my mind and it's impossible, but how funny would that be if the Chargers gave Eli Manning a call and said, hey, come play for us. I know you didn't want to get drafted by us and you pitched a fit, so we ended up with Phillip Rivers, but why don't we take you now and why don't you teach our rookie kind of like you did with Daniel Jones last year? I know that's impossible, but wouldn't that be something? That would be another 30 for 30. We're giving them all sorts of ideas.
That's right. Well, yeah, I love that. Those hot takes are why we come on the show and throw them out there. If it happens, we'll certainly play it back and take full credit, look like geniuses. I love that take there. I'll throw out a couple names that a lot of people aren't thinking about. The first one would be Case Keenum. He's only, I think it was 2017 where he took the Vikings when Sam Bradford went out. He took them to, I believe, the divisional round, Minnesota Miracle, all of that. That was all Case Keenum, and a lot of people forget about him. He's on that Redskins roster. If they move away from him, he is a free agent, an unrestricted free agent, so he can really go wherever he wants. Maybe, a team that needs kind of a Band-Aid or a duct tape solution for the time being. could take Case Keenum and he shows out. I think he could be interesting for fantasy. And then talking about the Redskins quarterback room, also want to throw out Alex Smith. He's still there. He is under a pretty hefty contract. He's getting paid about $25 million a year. He signed a 4-year, $94 million deal with the Redskins. Just a few years ago, and he's back from injury. Said he went through a lot of adversity with that injury. He had some infection problems. There was even risk of death at one point was being brought up. It's absolutely crazy story from Alex Smith, but maybe we see the reinvention of him. He's 35 years old, may have a couple of years left in the tank. Maybe whether it's through trades or the Redskins just decide to move on from him, maybe Alex Smith ends up somewhere and we hear his name again. And then one more I'll throw out there, super hot take, is Nick Mullins. Nick Mullins, I believe, is a restricted free agent in the 49ers. For those of you that remember, he came in last year when Jimmy G tore the ACL and showed flashes at times. Kind of had the Gardner Minshew type of vibe, just young kid, just needed to get his chance and did the most that he could with it. In every post-game interview, he's just saying how grateful he is just for the opportunity to be on the field. I think Nick Mullins could be an interesting story and one to follow if he goes somewhere else as a backup and ends up taking over. We may hear his name again, and he'd be pretty interesting. But just wanted to throw that out there, just super deep free agent pick. Alex, anything to add here before we sign off?
Nothing else to add, Steph. I love those picks. I mean, Keenum's interesting. I guess one thing to add about what you said is, Case Keenum could go to a team like the Bears. I mean, think about Mitch Trubisky is there in Chicago. They might not want a guy to replace Trubisky, but someone that's like a little bit more of a threat to actually take over as the starter. So if Trubisky's not playing well, they can say, hey, we're going to move on. Maybe it lights a fire in him. So I think that's a great take. I think Keenum could really be a good veteran to bring in and create some competition for some of these teams. So I love all the names you threw out. Love the discussion today. Love some of these hot takes. We'll see what happens. Maybe we'll do another show after free agency, with these quarterbacks, looking at the draft to say, like, what teams do we think are going to draft quarterbacks and where. That might be another good chance to look back and see what happened. But yeah, I love these takes. I loved talking to some of these guys, and it's going to be really fun to see. I don't remember a year with this much potential for quarterback turnover in a long time. And we just hit on the teams that we think are guarantees. There's going to be a lot of other teams outside of that. You think about like Tom Brady and Drew Brees and some of these other teams that have some quarterback questions, Dak Prescott. So there's going to be a lot more than what we talked about. We just kind of scratched the surface here, but it's going to be a lot of fun.
Absolutely. And one more thing, I know we won't get off this topic. The Case Keenum to the Bears, I actually love that. And another thing I think that supports that take is that Chase Daniel, current backup for the Bears, is also an unrestricted free agent. So they can walk away from him and bring Keenum in. I think that'd be actually pretty interesting and actually a likely scenario that could play out. But thank you all so much for listening. If you want to see all of our content, our rankings, we do have our way too early 2020 rankings currently up now on our website. That's doublemovesports.com. You can log on there, check everything out. We're continuing to upload player highlights and other video content to our YouTube channel, and that's just Double Move Sports on YouTube. And as always, you can interact with us and view all of our content, whether it's player profiles. We're doing a lot where we're kind of really letting the 2019 season and the stats and the fantasy performances really settle in now and digest some of those numbers, see if we can identify any trends. We're doing a lot of that on the social media, as well as videos, more highlights, that sort of thing. And you can interact with us on there. Love chatting with you guys. But thank you all again so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.